be honored if you would join us.
Hello, welcome to Galactic Initiative. I'm your host, Jeff. 2020 has been a difficult year. I hope you can spend a few moments in the wonderful, exciting, and inclusive Star Wars galaxy. It can bind us together with the force that flows through it. Before Part 3 wraps The Empire Strikes Back for its 40th anniversary, I would like to recognize two groups for their support. First, I appreciate you, the audience, for your patience with the sound quality. The audio recording start is virtual meetings that connect one side of the United States to the other. I know certain segments have poor volume, clarity, and/or transitions, but trust me, I include only the best of what is available. Perhaps in the future I can upgrade the tech. In the meantime, thank you for sticking with me. Second, I appreciate my guests David and Sean for over 12 hours of discussion to create this 3-part project. Editing always eliminates some interesting content, but they remain constructive as I struggle to piece together the final cut of each episode. Now, Part 3 of The Empire Strikes Back. So Luke flies to Dagobah and has a difficult experience coming through the atmosphere, crash lands on the planet. He's looking for a certain type of person or being, and Yoda taking advantage of the time to observe Luke. Let me hear your thoughts on the opening scenes of Dagobah and Yoda's deception or trick.
Well, for me, this was one of the slower parts of the movie. I mean, when I was growing up, it was one of those fast forward sections. Wasn't necessarily a big fan of it. With Yoda, after being in isolation for as long as he had been, it was kind of a, I guess, a feeling out process for him. Is this guy, how force sensitive is he? Is he a bad guy, good guy type of a thing? It was a nice little twist, not having Yoda basically saying, "Hey, it's me, I'm Yoda, let's go train." The only Jedis that we had witnessed or seen prior to, we got Obi-Wan, we got Vader, and we've got Luke. That are all force sensitive, and then we have this little 2.5 foot creature that all of a sudden is all powerful and wise. And in some aspects, it almost seemed like a joke. But I love the puppeteering. I mean, it was a cool little swerve.
I think, yeah. I mean, clearly it's a slower moment in the film, but it can't all be Rise of Skywalker, where it's 5 minutes of action followed by 5 minutes of action followed by 5 minutes of action. And of course, initially when you first see it, you're like, what is this crazy little rat looking dude? The way he speaks and the sound of his voice and the fact that he's tiny, and you're not really sure, is he just a swamp creature? Is he indigenous to the planet? And I do like the fact that, I guess in the moment as a child, it was funny. You know, he was crazy and he was staring at the flashlight and he was stealing Luke's food. And it was a good chuckle. It was a nice, light moment. But, going back and rewatching and observing this whole process, it's quite profound, in what Yoda is doing. He's testing Luke the whole time. How do you deal with strangers? How do you deal with alien creatures? How do you deal with people who don't necessarily act the way you do? How do you deal with stress? In the situation, you've crashed your ship, you're on a planet, you don't know anybody, you're in the middle of a war, you need to get back to the rebellion, and he's under all kinds of different pressures and stressors, and Yoda is poking him with his cane and seeing how he responds, and he's observing and judging his worthiness as a potential Jedi apprentice. We see Luke as still, while we talked about earlier, he's manifesting more power as a Jedi, and he's using the Force, to move his lightsaber and things like that, and he's communing with the ghost or the Force ghost of Ben Kenobi. That he still is that immature, kind of whiny, farm boy that we met in Episode 4. He still has a sense of entitlement. He, as soon as he finds out that Yoda is the Jedi Master and he hears Ben Kenobi's voice, he's like, "Yeah, dude, I'm so it. I'm the man. You trained me. and Yoda's like, you couldn't even deal with me stealing your breakfast bar." And so it's a great. I just love it. I love the scene. And again, like David mentioned, the puppeteering of Yoda in this film is magnificent. If this was a CG character, it wouldn't have worked. It would not have worked at all, especially in that era. But just in general, the physical interaction between the puppet and the actors, you watch it today, and it works. It's great. It's fantastic.
Luke's assumptions, his impatience, his overconfidence, they all come out in this scene. And as a kid, I didn't appreciate them to the level that I do now. It was the first time I got a sense of what it actually meant to be a Jedi. Ben trained Luke to block beams from a remote, and he spoke to Luke to help Luke make the shot that destroyed the Death Star. But Yoda's approach to this meeting with Luke and what will follow really crystallized the idea of, okay, now I understand what the Jedi are. I understand their perspectives, their philosophies, like how they're coming at this conflict, this struggle. And it's very, very cool. I gained a deep appreciation for the Jedi, for Yoda, through this and other teachings that Yoda has for Luke.
I would agree with that totally. We really do start to get the idea of the Force and the Jedi and all of these philosophies. Really, we start to get them filled out a little bit through Yoda's teachings and whatnot. But in this initial moment, and like you say, it does take a little bit of an adult to come back and look at it. When we're kids, we're more like Luke, right? We're impatient. We think we have all the answers. We want to get to it. There's not a lot of deep reflection or self-awareness or any of that stuff that goes on. And as we get older, we move into more of the Obi-Wan / Yoda role, where there's a lot more introspection and a lot more experience and wisdom and knowledge. And so it's interesting, these films, as in a larger sense, as we watch these movies, as we watch them as children, they appeal to us in one way. And as we watch them as an adult, they appeal to us in a completely different way. But we haven't lost the excitement and the wonder and the joy that we had when we watched them as kids. But we just have these deeper, layers of appreciation that come on with age and repeated viewings.
In Yoda's small house, in Yoda's tiny house, Luke's frustration finally reaches a boiling point. His impatience to meet this great warrior prevents him from being kind and civil. And then Yoda has finally finished his assessment, his observation of Luke, and decided that Luke cannot be trained. He's old. He cannot focus. He's unkind. He does not deal with stress well. And Ben Kenobi comes in to mediate. For me, I absolutely love the scene, but Yoda's final lines to Luke before we cut back to the asteroid field, Luke promising, confidently asserting, "I'm not afraid," and Yoda responding, "You will be. You will be."
It goes to the point of, hey, you have no clue what being a Jedi is and what the expectations are, and Yoda knowing who he is and what he has to accomplish. I mean, yeah, he's going to be afraid, because what's down the road is, hey, your destiny, you're going to be afraid. You're going to find some, there's going to be some rocky roads ahead of you, and you better be ready for them, because if you're not, then we have an even bigger problem.
There's the moment, though, where Yoda turns and says, you're going to be afraid and you're going to regret this. It's interesting because up to that moment, he had been adamant about not training Luke. Like, I'm not going to do it. You're too old. You're too set in your ways, impatient, whatever, all that stuff. And Ben's like, oh, come on. And, remember me when I was a kid. But Yoda is still, He's still putting his foot down. He's still saying, no, I'm not going to train him. I'm not going to do it. And then Luke comes out with his arrogant mouth and says, oh, I'm not scared. I'm the best. And in that moment, Yoda says, oh, I'm going to train you. By the time we're done, you're probably going to think it was better if you just got in your ship and left. Right? Because that's what the implication of, you're going to be afraid. And I think that, like David mentioned, it's, Yoda knows what this is all about. He and Ben have clearly talked about this. Ben has sent Luke to him. Yoda is the greatest of all Jedi, and he's trained, Jedi for 1,000 years. And here he knows that Luke's destiny is to right the universe and to, bring balance to the Force and all this stuff. And so he might be referring to that, but he might also just be referring to the fact that what we're going to show you, what you're going to learn, and what you're going to find out about your own self is going to be far more difficult than anything that you're going to, encounter in your training.
And I do take a little exception to that, because here we have Yoda, who is isolated himself from the universe, cut himself off probably from the Force, just like Luke did in the sequels. I mean, he was the leader of the Jedi for all intents and purposes, and the Empire rose up and took over under his watch. So wise, I'm not exactly sure.
And I understand what you're saying, and I acknowledge that as we move forward chronologically in real time and the movies come out and then we get the prequels, we get a completely different view of who Yoda is and his abilities and all of those things. Okay, so yes, you are correct that after we watch the sequel or the prequels, the sequels are not canon; they don't exist. The prequels, yes, we see that he and Mace Windu are having a conversation about how their powers are diminished and how they're not really able to help, and we need to tell the Chancellor and the Council that we're the Senate that we're no good anymore, and all I get that. And then there's all the fan theories and all the conversations and all the stuff about they got played by Palpatine, but that's to come later. If Ben Kenobi is the sage, if he's the wise sage that we got in Episode 4, and this character Yoda, if this guy trained him, then clearly he's at a higher level of wisdom and knowledge and all those things. And as I'm saying, that's just the assumption that you make going into this. That's why I say the wisest and the best or whatever. I mean, yeah, clearly, if you go through the entire canon of material and then you compile all that and sift through it, yeah, by the time the Order 66 hits, the Jedi aren't what they once were, clearly.
I don't think it's fair to say that Yoda has turned his back on the galaxy, particularly not in the way of Luke in The Last Jedi, because the true lesson of the Clone Wars for the Jedi was not to fight. They fought, and it was the wrong path. It clouded their judgment. It drew them into a conflict, it changed their role. Going into exile, communing with the Force, that's a very Jedi thing to do. They see that the only way out of the conflict is not to pick up a lightsaber and go to war. It's to figure out how balance can be restored. If Obi-Wan and Yoda teamed up, why couldn't they beat Vader and the Emperor? I think they learned their lesson. That fighting, there's going to be some degree of fighting that's necessary, but going to war is not the role of the Jedi.
So then I guess the alternative is, hey, let's use this kid as our weapon of choice. Is that what you're saying? Because that's what they've chosen to do.
You've got a Force ghost and a 900-year-old toad. You're not going to win. Or you can get a 20-something who's strong in the Force and is the son of the chosen one. Go with the kid. Go with the young talent, man. It's rookie time.
You say chosen, David. Obi-Wan and Yoda didn't choose Luke. The Force chose Luke. They were to be mentors, but to say that they pulled the strings and they came up with this plan, not at all. This is the prophecy. This is the fulfillment of the prophecy, and that's what they learn through their time communing with the Force and reflecting on the mistakes of the past.
I'll buy that. I'll buy that rationale.
Always for knowledge and defense, never for attack, my friend. There had to be a preservation of the order, refocusing on the meditative portion and listening to the will of the Force, and then, like you say, figuring out that Luke is technically the chosen one, and they are in service of the Force and preparing Luke for this fight. However, I will also side with David. They chose the method in which they would do that. They know that if they tell Luke, then he won't do the job. I mean, they're right, and they're also wrong. Yes, it's not really up to Ben Kenobi and Yoda who the instrument is, but yes, it's up to them how they approach and train Luke to achieve this goal.
So Yoda's training of Luke involves the cave.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. Growing up, this scene was by far the scariest and spookiest part of any of the 3 Star Wars movies for me. It gives me the willies even as an adult. But I really started to think about Yoda's comment, his failure at the cave, because I could never really understand what that meant. How, Luke goes down there and he basically kicks Vader's butt, and it's revealed that Vader is like a shadow of him. The failure is ultimately, 1, he took his saber down there, and 2, that he used his anger and his hate. I didn't quite understand that until more recently, that obviously is not the Jedi way, and I do wonder, there was a lot of, there's either metal in the background or concrete or something. I'm wondering if that is like a starship or something that was potentially cut later on, but I mean, it looked totally man-made, not like a normal cave. Wonder what the rest of the purpose of it was.
In some expanded universe content, an evil Force user is supposed to have crashed coming to Dagobah to confront Yoda, and the cave is actually part of the ship that this evil being flew. And so echoes of the dark side are there, and that's what gives the area its power.
Expanded Universe has a couple of different takes on it. And one of them is what you said. Some dark side user had come to Dagobah to confront Yoda. He was defeated or died, and that was the residual Force power. There's also been talk that there was a Jedi temple or a Sith temple there, and that's sort of the remnants, and there's a concentration of dark side energy there. One of the things that I've always thought about is if Luke had trusted Yoda, and Yoda had said, you don't need your weapons, let's go in there and figure it out, would the manifestation in the cave been Vader? Would it have been something else? Would it have been non-confrontational? Because the dark side energy in this place mirrors whatever Luke is doing, right? And it's feeding off of it, and it's feeding him back this experience that he's having, whether it's mentally or whether it's somewhere out, some other plane of existence or whatever. But the point is, Luke goes in there ready for combat, and so he gets combat, and then he finds out that he resides in Vader, which is basically saying to him, you reap what you sow, kind of a deal, right? And then the other thing is him being told that if he doesn't check these emotions and problems that he's having with stuff, he's going to turn into Vader. If we are only going with what we've seen on screen, I don't know the mechanics of the cave. Was it a vision? Was it a hallucination? Was he temporarily transported through one of those portholes that we saw in Rebels, where he's on a different side of the Force verse or whatever? We don't know, right? But we do know that Yoda is testing him. He brought him to the dark side and told him all, what he needed to know. And so was the failure in not trusting the Jedi way and the Jedi philosophy and just approaching it in peace? Or was the failure not trusting Yoda when Yoda says you don't need your guns, and he's like, no, I'm taking my guns, bro? Or is the failure him, fighting Vader we don't. I mean, there's so many different things that could be viewed as the failure. It would have been nicer to get a little more exposition from Yoda on why he was a failure. But again, like David said, it was as a 6-year-old, that was definitely a creepy moment when Vader comes out of the fog and and you hear the breathing and the lightsabers ignite. You're like, oh man, it's on. And the first thing in your mind is like, how did Vader get here? What is he doing on the planet? I have no idea what's going on here. The cutscenes to Yoda, where he's sitting there and he's drawn in the dirt with his cane and he's shaking his head. He's not trying to help him. He's not communicating with him in any way. He's not giving him any advice. He's just sitting there waiting for the outcome. So, again, that's kind of an interesting little aspect of that moment.
Do or do not. There is no try.
Yoda has raised Luke's X-Wing from the swamp. Let's talk about the most famous quote in the Star Wars saga.
Do or do not, there is no try?
That's the one.
Oh, gold star for me today.
The best lines, I said this in the introduction, the best lines come from this movie. This is the one that I hear most frequently from Star Wars fans and non-fans alike. I mean, even people who don't know Star Wars seem to know this line and use it occasionally.
It's a very good quote. I mean, if you're not going to do something right, I guess in some cases don't do it at all.
It is the most recognized line, yes, though, probably the entire saga. Luke has been training as a Jedi. Yoda is imparting these messages to him on how to use the Force and what the Force means and all these things. He's heard stuff from Ben Kenobi. He's had these experiences in his life. And then here comes Luke, and Luke's like, it's impossible. You can't do it. And Yoda's like, look, son, here's the story. I'm 2 foot tall. I'm a toad. I'm going to take your ship, and I'm going to pull it out of the bottom of the ocean. I'm going to dry it off, and set it down, and I'm going to make it pretty. And the only difference between, what's happening here between you and I is I believe in the Force and you don't. Or I am fully trusting in the Force and you're not there yet. The demon that he's dealing with in that moment is self-doubt and lack of confidence. And he lets the demon win because he says, I'm pulling it out of the water and I get it about halfway out and I get tired or I get frustrated or I just feel like I can't do it, so I give up. He gave up. He quit. And that was the biggest failure. And so then Yoda, of course, goes on that little speech about, I am allying myself with this energy and bringing it up and doing it that way. And it's humbling yourself before the Force and understanding that the Force is doing the work. You're just asking it nicely, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. And then the best line is after that, I don't believe it. That is why you fail. That's the lesson, and that's the failure for Luke Skywalker. Even though he has seen Ben Kenobi die and come back, even though he's levitated rocks and done all these things and seen visions of the future and all this stuff, he still doesn't believe in it. And that's the big moment.
He makes a decision against Yoda's advice, against Obi-Wan's advice to leave because he's had a vision of his friends suffering. At this point, Force Ghost of Obi-Wan and Yoda are there, and on the one hand, trying to convince him, talk him out of the decision. On the other, giving him a quick preparation in terms of what he can expect with Vader. And then the final part of the scene, Obi-Wan saying, as Luke's X-Wing departs, that boy was our last hope. And Yoda saying, no, there is another.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got two people basically saying, hey, I don't think you're ready to do this. I understand, your friends are in danger. The future is always in motion. You never know what's really going to happen. You get the impression that they think this is a trap, and you really shouldn't go. But we're not going to hold you back. This is your destiny.
The thing at the end, though, about there is another. It's setting up a moment later in the film when Luke and Leia have that connection, but it's not overt. So you can still wind up going into Return of the Jedi and not knowing that they're related. Or if you're an astute viewer in the moment in 1980, you're saying, okay, so Princess Leia is also a Force user, and she could be the backup plan to Luke. You've been conditioned at this point through the 2 films that the Jedi Order is over. There is a Sith Lord, and there's a couple of remnants floating around, and that Luke somehow has this larger purpose and destiny through the whole process. But there's never been any mention up to this point of what's the backup plan? How do we defeat Vader and the Emperor? But maybe it's just because they weren't training Leia, or they, all that stuff that they were focusing on Luke. Clearly Yoda is referencing it, but it was a big deal because I remember there was a lot of playground conversation about that. Well, Yoda said there was another, so who is it? Is it somebody we've met already? Is it somebody, And then, of course, at the end, we see when Luke reaches out with the Force and he makes a connection with Leia. We don't know, is it just because Luke is such a powerful Force user that it's almost like Jedi mind tricking her to go back and pick him up? Or is she the other? Like, we really don't know. It's not clear. It's not well defined. And it's kind of overlooked almost.
Yeah, most people assume Yoda's referencing Leia. Let me take it in a different direction and get your thoughts. In light of The Mandalorian, could I suggest that the other Hope is actually the child?
Ooh, that's deep.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. So that would put him at about, 40 for Return of the Jedi, when Yoda actually died?
Yes. So the Mandalorian show takes place immediately or very soon after Return of the Jedi, correct?
Yes.
The child, they said it was 50 years? They said it was around 50 years old?
Yeah.
In the first episode, and they were talking about the age of it. So it would probably be sometime during episode 3.
So would that be maybe something from his cloak that fell in the Senate chamber?
Oh, that they cloned?
Yeah.
It could be, or maybe Anakin wasn't the only one keeping secrets.
Yeah, I don't think the child is a clone. Just a feeling.
I know they were trying to clone it,
right?
Because that was the thing. They handed him off to that doctor, and his whole thing was he was trying to extract. They were talking about extracting usable material, and I don't know if they were trying to pull midichlorians or if they were trying to pull actual DNA or.
Oh, please tell me they do not do the midichlorian trick again. That please
no,
no.
David, they won't. They won't.
It's not a trick. It's canon.
Yeah, but they won't go back to the midichlorians. But cloning's a possibility. But if you do the math, the child was alive during this period of time.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. I think that
even if it was cloned, yeah.
Right, and we don't know its relationship to Yoda beyond that they're the same species. So is it possible that Yoda sensed the child or knew about the child? I just raised the point. It's interesting. In light of The Mandalorian, it doesn't necessarily... Leia is not necessarily the other Hope.
Correct. And honestly, I think that is a plausible plot point for them to potentially go through for either season 2 or season 3 of The Mandalorian.
So now we're in a situation post-Jedi where the Empire knows of this baby Yoda, this child, which we don't know is a clone or not, but clearly they want it. Mm-hmm. Like they want it, they want to experiment on it, they want to clone it, they want to do it. I don't know what exactly their purpose is. Maybe they think that if they can pull or extract a certain type of genetic material from this child, that they can respawn the Emperor. This might be part of the film that shall not be discussed. I could see that. Again, it's tying in the prequels to the sequels to the saga, and it's like that seems to be a thing that the Disney crew is focusing on pretty heavily right now, is trying to make excuses for what they have produced recently by tying it in inextricably to the sequel or to the original and to the prequel trilogy.
We could write an episode of The Mandalorian, or a few anyway, and smooth out a lot of the problems with the sequel trilogy.
Well, that's absolutely true, and I think that part of that is why we're starting to see all these characters popping up. all the references like, oh, we're going to bring back Boba Fett. We're going to bring back this. It's like, I can see them using those things to, further that narrative and, like you say, tie up the loose ends and fill in the gaps.
You got a lot of guts coming here after what you pulled.
David's excited.
Woo!
Excited to talk about Cloud City.
Cloud cars.
It's
Yep.
the best.
The Falcon arrives at Cloud City. It's flown sublight to Bespin. Let's talk about the special edition changes. Did you like the updates?
Out of all the 3 special editions, I thought this was the best one. It allowed for more Cloud City. I mean, especially of the rival, but now looking back to the original version, I mean, it totally felt claustrophobic. To be able to see more added a lot more to the character of Cloud City and not just like a bunch of hallways, as far as I was concerned.
The changes they made to Cloud City made Cloud City even more epic and sweeping with the approach of the Falcon to the city, as well as bringing more light into the city as we're going through it, and really having a more realistic background or vignette as they're going past windows and things like that. I think that probably of all of the things that George Lucas did with the special editions, the cleaning up of Cloud City and making it better and more expansive is probably the best thing he did to any of the films.
I really like cloud cars. I've always
That's right. I mean, we don't normally single out vehicles, but the twin pod cloud car is bizarre. So let's talk about it.
It is. Actually, I've got one of the mini die-cast ones sitting right here, and looking at it, I mean, it's a cool concept, but I don't understand the side-by-side car thing. I mean, it kind of resembles a sidecar for a motorcycle, so it would be interesting to find out how those two interact with one another. I mean, is one in charge of communication? Is one in charge of shooting? Is one in charge of driving? That's the curiosity for me.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird and interesting design when you think about it. 2 identical pods. It's strange. What do these guys do? What's the split of duties? What's the division of labor there? I never, as a child, and even in the years between then and now, I've never really sat down and analyzed the cloud car. I've always just accepted it. It didn't feel weird to me. And now, of course, now that we're sitting here looking at it and we're looking at the schematics of it and we're talking about what it does, it's like these 2 big cars with this tiny little motor in between it. And I don't know, is it defense? I mean, yes, they shoot at the Falcon. Is it more of, I don't know, is it like a security guy at the mall on a Segway? I have no idea.
I enjoy the pilot figure. I like the helmet. I like the goggles. It's pretty sharp. Yeah?
Yeah.
That guy played a much larger role in the Star Wars galaxy that was happening in the basement than he did in any of the films.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Because, I mean, we barely see him, especially in the original release. We see so little of the pilot. It's like he looks more like a Canto Bight security guy than anything else. So,
yes,
his little communicator piece is the one that's the unique accessory to that figure.
And of course, I'm missing that.
Well, it's the one that was easily lost.
So the greeting that the Falcon receives is not what the crew expects and not what they hope for. They're escorted to the landing platform by the twin pod cloud cars, and we meet Lando Calrissian.
One of the all-time great introductions. Does a fake punch to Han and then pulls back and gives him the big bear hug. Now seeing Solo, a Star Wars story, it was nice to have a little bit more background to their interaction. And unfortunately, they really pulled back his character for Return of the Jedi. It would have been nice to have more of him.
The introduction of Lando Calrissian is pretty fantastic, but it's also another reminder to Han in this moment that his past is everywhere and it's catching up to him, especially when Han is first walking up to Lando, and Lando tries to take the fake swing at him and all that. But Billy D. Williams gives a great performance. He's a great character, the betrayal and the redemption and all those things. Like, it's very, very well done. It's just good stuff.
I agree with you, David. Return of the Jedi did not do justice to Lando's character, but charismatic, likable, and as Sean, you said, Billy D. Williams, professional actor, taking the role seriously, bringing a lot of personality to the part. So Lando is happy to see the group and welcomes them to Cloud City, puts resources at their disposal. 3PO takes a wrong turn, hearing an R2 unit, and is blasted to bits by stormtroopers. Did it ultimately spoil the big reveal for you?
Not necessarily for me. I personally, I thought it was even funnier before that. 3PO runs into another droid unit like himself, and it gives him attitude right before he walks in. I thought that was pretty funny. And hey, there's more of these protocol droids out there. They're pretty cool. But yeah, him walking in there and getting blown apart was obviously foreshadowing, and for me, not necessarily a spoiler.
To a Star Wars fan who is an astute listener, it clearly sounds like a stormtrooper. I don't know if it necessarily blows the reveal, because we've been told, that Lando is a shady character, just like Han's a shady character. So we have this idea when they show up on Cloud City that things on Cloud City might not necessarily all be on the up and up, and that we're dealing with a criminal element from Han Solo's past. And even though we're having a conversation about labor troubles and distribution rights and all this stuff, Leia and Han are all kind of, and Chewie, are all sort of, they're keeping their distance in a way. They're trying to keep an eyeball on this guy. And so when we see, 3PO get blown up, it reinforces that element. I don't think it kills the reveal down the road of Vader. It may tease some kind of betrayal from Lando. Like, at this point, we don't know. I mean, yeah, he says, I made a deal to keep the Empire out of here forever. That's really at the last possible second, right before we get the Vader reveal. So I don't think it spoils it. I think that maybe it puts a little more tension on the audience, saying, well, what is Lando going to do? Or what are Lando's people going to do? Or is there something else going on? But I don't think it spoils the Vader reveal.
I think as a kid, my first thought was that Boba Fett had reached Cloud City ahead of the group. Anyway, 3PO is blown to bits. He disappears. Leia inquires about him in the next scene, but no one is particularly concerned because, Sean, as you said, everyone has 3PO fatigue. They're honestly happy to be rid of him for a time. Of all the characters, Chewie saves 3PO.
So, Chewie finds him down in a junk pile. Ugnaughts start playing keep away from Chewie with his head. You're looking around and you're trying to count all the different parts of C-3PO and making sure that they're all there so that Chewie can rescue him. I love that scene.
It's interesting that, Chewbacca, he's the only businessman in the group. He's mission focused and he's trying to figure out a couple of things. He's probably trying to figure out how to fix the Falcon. Second of all, he's the only one who goes looking for 3PO. I'm pretty sure that Princess Leia and Han are kind of like, you know what? Enjoy the silence for a minute. But it's kind of it establishes more character for Chewbacca. Because in the last movie we didn't get a lot. In this movie we're getting a lot more Chewbacca, and this is just another moment where we do. And then you get the Ugnaughts, who are important. I mean, they run the carbon freeze machine. They almost melt 3PO down. That would be the poetry, right? The beats that George does. And and this is another thing that gets carried through, I think, as a theme in the three films. Like, the Jawas are tiny, but they're very, very important to the story. They're an integral, part of the economy of Tatooine. And of course, we have the Ewoks, who, in the third film, obviously overturn the Empire or are the key to victory on Endor. But Yoda's definitely the small important thing in this film too. He's the great Jedi Master. He's the greatest of all Jedi. He's also the smallest. And so, again, it's a theme, right? It's a topic that we get that moves through the movies, and it seems to work.
As Lando arrives in the group's quarters and invites them for refreshments and springs the trap, are there any clues? Is there anything missed to indicate what's about to happen?
No, I think it's a pretty, Lando's basically, doing his job. He's a card player, gambler, scoundrel. He plays it really close to the vest because he understands what the consequences are. I mean, he'll lose his city, so he's playing it cool. He walks them right into the trap.
That's well stated. He doesn't try and do anything beforehand, and he's clearly he feels bad about it. We see the scene where they're walking and they're talking, and and again, this goes to Billy D. Williams and his great acting. You can feel the regret. You don't know at first. You don't really know that it's regret. They're being nostalgic, and he sighs. He says, "Man, seeing you sure brings back some stuff," or whatever. But then he hands him right over, and it's interesting because I think that it has to do with Vader, right? Because maybe if Boba Fett had showed up, maybe they would have thrown him in the brig, and just not dealt with it. He's in this really unfortunate position. I'm sure, like a lot of free-spirited and free-minded individuals in the galaxy, he's no friend of the Empire. He's a card shark and a thief and a liar, and he's done some shady things and some bad business, and he's finally got himself in a reasonably respectable, above board business, and then the Empire shows up and says, "Do what we tell you, or we're going to crush the whole thing." They're in your house, so you might as well give them what they want, so they don't break the dishes.
Lando's betrayal becomes clear as the dining room door slides open. Han draws immediately, fires 2 deadly accurate blasts. Vader deflects both with his hand, seizes Han's blaster through the Force, pulls it to him. David, you mentioned Vader having a funny side. We would be honored if you would join us. We can see clear regret on Lando at this point. It's great the way Billy D. Williams conveyed that. We can also see through Harrison Ford just how much it pains him that this man he considers a friend has betrayed him. Just talk a little bit about the dynamics of the scene, the surprise, and the interaction between the characters after the trap has been sprung.
I mean, it clearly shows Vader's overarching power as a Dark Lord of the Sith. You see people getting blasted by lasers and they die. But here you got Vader just put his hand up, and then he uses the Force to get the blaster. There's a couple things that come to mind when I think about this scene. First of all, Boba Fett, was he there before? I mean, did he beat them to Cloud City? And then the other thing, they came for a drink. They came for a meal. Did they all just sit down and have like a Thanksgiving dinner? What type of a conversation took place once that door shut? That's kind of been one of my things that I've always really wanted to know.
We have talked also about Lucas doesn't fall into certain tropes. We don't get the Bond villain who sits you down at the table and gives you a nice dinner and tells you how he's going to rule the world, and we don't get any of that. We get a very Hitchcockian approach to this. We don't. It's off screen. Vader says, we'd be honored if you join us or whatever, and then the doors close and that's it. Like David says, immediately your brain starts spinning. Like, what is going on in that room? What is the conversation like? What is Boba Fett saying? What is Vader saying? What is Han, Leia, and Chewbacca saying? Like, we all desperately want to know, but ultimately it doesn't matter. Now, that reveal is magnificent. That scene, the door opens and it's this bright, white, well lit room, and here is the black visage of Vader with his cape and his helmet. Just total contrast. It's so good. And then, like you say, when Lando kind of looks up at Han and the door opens, it's that moment. It's that Judas moment, where you have to look the person you're betraying in the eyes and say, I'm handing you over, bro. And then Boba Fett popping out from behind the side. It's really great. It's probably one of the better moments in the entire film, actually.
So we don't know, like David, you said, very curious what happened in the dining room, but we know what happens next. Princess Leia and Han are tortured. It's reasonable to assume Chewie is tortured as well. 3PO has already been blown to bits. It's always struck me as odd that 3PO is delivered to the cell, that he's there in parts and Chewie can rebuild him.
Yeah, that is a little weird. I mean, Chewie obviously calms down and starts putting 3PO together, and it was a stormtrooper that took out C-3PO. But yeah, you have this really cool scene of Lando, Boba Fett, and Vader talking it out regarding the torture of Han Solo. Yeah, and Lando's about the only guy that actually talks back to Vader. The deal has been altered by Vader, and things are going south real quick.
Yeah, I think that like what David said, the fact that Lando is probably, other than Luke Skywalker, is the only person to stand up to Vader in the entire galaxy. It's pretty interesting, and it speaks again to his character. I mean, he's clearly an individual, and he's not used to working for people. But the torture thing. It's when we see Han and he's dropped off, and he says they didn't even ask me any questions or whatnot. It becomes clear that Vader is capable of cruelty for the sake of cruelty. And that there's no real, at least it's not revealed to us yet, the purpose of why he's torturing these people, which is, of course, to put out this disturbance in the Force that will then attract Luke Skywalker to come to the Cloud City to try and save his friends. But again, it's all happening off screen, so it allows our mind to wander and to try and figure out what it is exactly that's being done to Han as he's screaming off stage. But I do like the interaction between, Vader and the people that he's manipulating. He's playing Boba Fett too. Boba Fett's like, look, man, I'm in this for the bounty. I don't really care about your politics. I don't care about your problem with your kid and all this other stuff. Like, I need my money. And then Lando's like, you told me, that you were going to do X, Y, and Z, and now you've completely changed it. It's interesting because Vader will allow a certain level of insubordination from these two independent actors. Like, killing Lando doesn't help him in this moment, because Lando has to keep the city running and has to keep things status quo while they're there taking care of this business. But then in the situation where one of his generals does something, he'll choke him out in front of everybody, so the entire fleet knows when Vader wants something, it has to be done right or you're going to be dead. And so it makes Vader just this even more evil thing.
Lando's visit to the cell indicates that he cares. Lando was under no obligation to come and visit, and he came to talk. He shares in that moment the information that's lacking. He tells Han and Leia that Vader doesn't care about them at all. And he drops the name Skywalker, which is meaningless to him. I think he came to explain himself, but he finds a very angry, understandably, he finds a very angry crew and leaves without forgiveness for him in Han's eyes. But the fact that he came to visit at all and he shares Vader's bigger plan is a sign. He cares more about them than they realize in that moment.
He's got a lot of things to answer for, and I think that he's finally landed in this place, and like Jeff said, he cares. He's invested heavily, not just financially in this thing, but emotionally I mean, he really does care about the people of Cloud City, the people that work for him, and what's going on there. And I think that's another reason why he felt compelled to make the deal with the Empire. So clearly, he's trying to offer and make amends and prove that, hey, I'm not. This isn't me playing you again. This is me really trying to help. And here's what's going on. And here's everything as I know it.
From the scene in the cell to the carbon freezing chamber. Amazing set, difficult to shoot in that environment, lots of takes, but this is one of the great scenes in the original trilogy. It just deepens the despair of this film. We're really starting to lose hope at this point. So talk to me about the carbon freezing chamber and losing Han.
Well, like you said, I mean, it's one of the most iconic sets. I applaud all the actors in the masks having to go up and down the stairs and walk around on that set, because that thing it's pretty dark. One of the more iconic lines, "I love you, I know." They tried like 5 or 6 different lines, and that's what Han came up with, or Harrison Ford came up with. For me, going to see this movie, or this scene particularly, or this, I shouldn't say scene, but the set, the carbon freezing set, brings back a lot of great memories, but very well done, very creative. Would have loved to have had this as a play set growing up.
Yes, there's a lot of emotional trauma in this scene. Chewbacca is roaring his head off. Leia is faced with the possibility that this person that she's in love with, who she hasn't really fully ever expressed her feelings for in the right way, is potentially going to die in that moment. And so there's a desperation in her. You have Han, always the cavalier, walking up to Lando and basically saying, "Hey, what up, buddy?" And of course, we still have our annoying 3PO moment. It tells the audience, like, oh, he'll be fine if he survives. Again, the set with all of the great lighting and the use of the steam and all that stuff. It's ominous. Like, everything is ominous, and it carries forward into the lightsaber fight between Luke and Vader in the same room in the same set. I mean, just that orange yellow light. This is the moment, right? This is the nadir of the rebellion, right? This is the bottom. The leadership of the rebellion is captured. Vader is triumphant. Luke is rushing to his own failure. At least that's what Yoda and Obi-Wan have told him. That if he doesn't stay and complete his training, it's again executed almost flawlessly. I mean, it's fantastic, the whole scene. And of course, we get the iconic line, as David mentioned, the "I love you, I know," which is epic cinema, right?
Kirshner praises Ford for always wanting to discuss ideas, changes to the script, which frankly is a nice way of saying that Ford was always bothering him about the script. But in this case, for the best, for the better, there's a clip of Ford discussing how the scene should be played. He had a very strong feeling about the original dialogue, and strong feelings that it didn't fit his character. His pushback leads to some freedom, and the ad lib, can you imagine The Empire Strikes Back without it? And now Lando's come to a crossroads. He decides to back out of the deal with the Empire, well, to the extent that he can, but he will, through Lobot, ambush the Empire's escort, bringing Leia and Chewie to Vader's flagship. Chewie tries to choke Lando. Lando's life really is owed to the fact that there's still a very slim chance to save Han.
Oh, I love the fact that Leia basically chews him out while Chewbacca's choking him out. and his line, "I'm just trying to help," type of that was a cross between comedy and he's getting what he deserves type of a thing, and Chewbacca, sticking up for his family. But yeah, I love the fact that even though Lando's getting choked out, he's still trying to redeem himself with the situation.
Lando faced again with another life and death decision, and Chewbacca is slowly killing it with his hands. He's still trying to make things right, and I understand the error of my ways, and I'm now fully committed to trying to rectify that situation. The whole trying to rescue the frozen Han, and this of course will lead us into the moment now where Luke is arriving.
So speaking of Lobot, would you say he's maybe the most curious character out there? There's so much you could potentially do with him. What do you guys think about that?
I like his blouse.
It's very blousy.
Flowing sleeves.
He's like
So
a
you're
backup. He's a backup singer for Prince.
So you guys are a fan of Lobot,
I don't care for Lobot.
but you care about the guards.
I don't care about the guards or Lobot. I'm impressed by the efficiency of the mall cops. Okay, the mall cops do a great job. They're on it.
Lobot is one of these characters. He's weird. He's got this weird cultish fandom about him. He like David said, he's kind of there. He's underutilized. He's like Jeff says, he's got a weird shirt. He doesn't say anything. And he has no dialogue. He just points and does stuff. But he's got his little blinky earphone things that are connected somehow to Lando's Fitbit. So clearly Lobot is high up in the food chain in Cloud City. I mean, he's Lando's right-hand man. And we see him on the platform. And then, we get the same thing again later on, when it's time to fight, or at least time to protect Lando. But yeah, Lobot is probably just like so many other things in this film. He was designed to sell action figures.
The final cut of the film is much kinder to him than what was being considered. In a deleted scene, Lobot is taken by 2 stormtroopers. So his story would end right there.
Huh. That I've never heard that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, deleted scene. So the legend of Lobot lives on because the character we don't see Lobot anymore. He's gone. He doesn't appear in Return of the Jedi, but he's not killed. It would have been nice to see Lobot in Return of the Jedi. It would have been nice to see him in the briefing room.
I was just going to say the briefing room. It would have been great. Him in the background with some other people.
Yeah, off to the side.
Yeah.
Sure. Still working with Lando, but now working for the rebellion. Something along those lines.
Maybe disappearing Lobot is the move from the Battle of Tanab. Somebody told him about it.
Exactly. Lobot doesn't speak. Did he draw them a picture?
Maybe he communicated with their Fitbits.
Hand signals.
That's right, exactly. The hand signals, of course.
Before Lando calls in the guards and double crosses the Empire, Han and Carbonite, Leia, and Chewie are used to lure Luke to the carbon freezing chamber. Boba Fett fires a few shots into the wall and disappears. We know from Boba Fett's perspective, he's not supposed to hit Luke. That's all part of the trap. And the very next door, as Luke tries to pursue, he finds himself with Vader. Another great line, "The Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you are not a Jedi yet." Luke climbs the stairs. He's the first to ignite his lightsaber. He uses 2 hands in the initial encounter. Vader only 1. In Luke's sloppy attack, Vader disarms him, knocks him down the stairs. Luke leaps out of the carbon freeze chamber before Vader can activate it, uses a severed tube to blow smoke in Vader's face, collects his lightsaber, and battles Vader off the platform. So he's gaining confidence and gaining momentum. Yeah, I'm inclined to believe at that point he thinks he can win. Still, it would be a more prudent decision to go after his friends, but he feels good about his chances.
I get, like, when he knocks Vader off the platform, I think in that moment is finally the moment where Luke should actually believe that he is capable. But I always kind of felt like, why wouldn't you go after your friends? That's just me. That dialogue too, as Jeff pointed out. I mean, the back and forth between Luke and Vader in that moment again gives us many great lines. The impressive, most impressive, and you're not a Jedi yet, and all those things. I mean, it's fantastic. It's interesting because this whole running lightsaber fight that we have now as we go through the facility, and as Luke is once again directed, towards certain places in order for Vader to take advantage of him. And we see, Vader change his strategy towards Luke and ultimately overwhelm him.
That lightsaber scene in the carbon freezing chamber, from the top of the steps all the way, to him basically knocking him off the side was pretty incredible saber work compared to what we saw in A New Hope. And that was one of the things that kept on getting me back to the theater. But I mean, it's very clear, like you mentioned with the choreography, one hand versus two. Vader's just, all right, another day at the office. Let's just get this over with, type of a deal. And then, Luke got his confidence and was able to get a couple good shots in.
Well, neither of you expressed confidence in Luke in our previous discussion. You both felt, despite Luke knocking Vader off the platform, that Vader was in control the entire time. Yes?
Yes, I agree.
The only slight tweak I would say, based on my comments earlier, is that Vader thought he was in full control at the beginning, simply because he wasn't giving Luke the credit that he deserved. He then pivoted and took back control, and then owned that entire battle all the way to the end, to where Luke jumped off the end of the gantry or whatever they were on. So, but yeah, I would say that probably for about 85 to 90% of that entire interaction between the two of them, Vader knew exactly what was going on, and he was in full control.
Do you believe that Vader planned to position Luke in front of the large window? And I mean in advance. Vader can't know. Well, he could know, but it's unlikely he knows what's on the other side of that window. And so Vader's plan to turn Luke and rule the galaxy, does his anger overwhelm his judgment at that point?
I think it does. Absolutely, it does. Obi-Wan didn't touch him. When Luke takes a shot at you and knocks you down, I'm not going to let that happen.
To address the first question, I don't know if Vader planned the particular room and the particular window and all that stuff. I think that Vader, and this is again something that we see over time with canon, with the prequels and with the Clone Wars cartoon, is that Anakin Skywalker is a consummate warrior and a great situational strategist. Whatever went down in the carbon freeze room and whatever got them down to that area where the large window was, I think that's Vader. Yes, he's surveying the landscape, which is, in that moment, a room with a large window and a whole bunch of boxes and things to throw around at him. Now, again, is that convenient plot stuff? Of course. So maybe getting Luke down there wasn't necessarily the original plan. I mean, the original plan was putting him in the carbonite, taking him back to the Emperor. To speak to the other conversation about when he gets thrown out the window, Palpatine wanted Luke killed. Whatever happens in this moment when Luke gets flung out the window, if he falls to his death, the Emperor's aim is achieved. You have that moment of despair, like, this is actually going to get a lot worse for our heroes. As Luke goes out that window.
Luke flies through the window, lands at a very, very precarious position. It's a walkway with a larger building or storage area attached to it. But Luke's obviously incredibly fortunate to have found something solid to land on. But he's beaten down, he's fatigued, wounded, and Vader will be waiting for him. Vader's losing patience with the exercise, and they will duel again, but Luke will score a hit on Vader.
Beginner's luck.
And then Vader will take his hand.
Yeah. I think, yeah, like you mentioned, he's pretty much done with this game. You know, a lot of times in sci-fi shows and stuff like that, when something is hit, there's no scoring or something gets missed. But in this scene, when they one or both lightsabers hit the guardrail, some of it's then missing. I think it adds to the reality. I know it's like a small piece of the film, but it's believable.
So, like Jeff said, you know, the Vader is becoming impatient with Luke and all the nonsense, and so he's driving him out here, and he's basically cornering him. And I think, again, this is another moment where Vader is using the terrain to his advantage. He's got Luke backed up all the way out there on the edge. He cuts his hand off, gets him out on the edge, and he's forcing him to make the choice. You know, Luke in this moment, I think, really becomes the hero. I mean, yes, in the last movie, you know, he blows up the Death Star, and that is a heroic act. But in this moment, he's willing to sacrifice himself ultimately in order to thwart the aims of the Sith and the Empire. Like, that is his character moment. He ultimately says, I am going to die rather than help the Empire.
I am your father.
The reveal of Vader's parentage to Luke was obviously a big twist in the franchise. It kind of makes you question Obi-Wan's character, as well as now knowing that Vader is basically fighting his son. How do you deal with that on a personal level? And then also, how did Luke get into the situation from when he was born? You know, what's the backstory? That's where the whole Skywalker saga is. It's an interesting choice. I mean, what if it played out differently if Vader hadn't just taken off his son's hand? Maybe had some type of hey, let's have a timeout here. Let's talk this out real quick. Let me tell you something about yourself. We'll obviously never know, but it's something to think about. Nobody, except for Hamill and was it Kirshner and Lucas, even knew about the swerve. Great job keeping that a secret. I don't remember it personally as, you know, watching it as a kid, thinking it as that big of a reveal. It's just like, oh, hey, that's kind of cool. You know, Luke's dad is Vader. Okay. But, you know, as an adult, it makes more of an impact.
The great reveal is, you know, to touch on a few points that David made. One, I don't know about taking the moment before cutting off his hand and discussing all this stuff. I think Vader has spent a lot of time trying to create something other than Anakin Skywalker and trying to psychologically divorce himself from what he was before he became a Sith Lord. The sheer fact of acknowledging that Luke Skywalker is his son is a reminder of all of that, and is probably fairly painful for him because, of course, it reminds him of the shame of his fall from Jedi to Sith, and the death of his wife, and all these things, you know, he's done in his life, the butchering of Sand People, cutting off Dooku's head, you know, etc. So I don't think that the plan necessarily was to reveal to Luke in that moment, or even to use it earlier on in the battle to try and convince Luke to do this, you know, this thing, to turn, to go to the dark side, to rule the galaxy. He's gotten to this point where he's impatient. It's been a struggle. He's starting to realize that, you know, maybe Luke is more powerful than I thought he was. And Vader, again, ever the tactician, goes straight for the feels on Luke. Luke has spent his whole life trying to find out who his father is, and in this moment of confrontation with pure evil, he finds out the truth, and it's shocking and it's horrifying and it's everything you never wanted to hear. Like, wow, now I have like all this shame, and I think Luke is in that moment. And we talked about the choice, a minute ago. I think Luke in that moment, not only is he being sacrificial, but I think he's also thinking that he can end the line of evil as well if he gives his life, because now he understands that I have that in my DNA. That's who I am. I think that the fact that Luke remains alive is probably the greatest weapon that the rebellion has against Vader, is because now Luke's existence is constantly distracting Vader from his mission, and it's distracting Vader from being a Sith Lord. Before the first Death Star was destroyed, I think Vader was a true Sith Lord. He had no ties to his past. He had hunted down and killed the Jedi. He killed younglings. He'd done all these things. He'd turned. He'd knelt to Palpatine, accepted his Sith Lord title of Darth Vader. He, ultimately has become the fist that enforces the Emperor's will throughout the galaxy. It's only when he finds out the name of the guy that blew up the first Death Star as Skywalker that he starts to go off the rails. And I think that he probably feels like it's his way around the rule of two, in the sense that his son, he doesn't believe that his son would ever kill him. And so it indemnifies him from that Sith practice of murdering your master and becoming the master and taking on a new apprentice. And these thoughts start to get in his head, and it starts to distract him from his job, and that that team of Vader and Palpatine starts to splinter. So again, fantastic.
I don't know why as a child I found it so difficult to believe that it couldn't be true. It's just this seesawing of the duel, where, as we've already discussed, the moments when Vader seems to be trying to kill Luke, times when Vader appears to be toying with Luke, and ultimately the moment when Vader will try to turn Luke. Perhaps from Vader's perspective, it's just a test. He's going to assess whether or not Luke's worthy, even as his son, are you worthy of standing by me, of ruling with me? But what a moment in cinematic history, right? Because this is the movie that will inaugurate the age of sequels, and this is the line that the film hinges on. Where does this rank?
It's got to be up there. I mean, in at least the top 10, if not the top 5.
The only thing that is coming to me in this moment would be Citizen Kane. Again, here goes George, forever altering the course of cinema. And, he started it with episode 4 and the technological advances with camera work and models and matte painting and, all these things. So I would think that, I'm sure there are, film scholars and people who are broader consumers of classic cinema that could come up with a few things, but in Hollywood, it's the Vader reveal's got to be at least in the top 5. Absolutely.
There have been great mystery films, obviously the Hitchcock movies, but this is a different type of film. This is an action adventure film, and we're deep into the second chapter, and the discussion didn't end in 2 days on social media and we're on to the next thing. I mean, this moment lingered. It lingered into the release of Return of the Jedi 3 years later. And the fact that this film sets every studio on a quest for franchises.
Move along. Move along.
The film comes to an end. Luke is rescued, hangs onto a weather vane, uses the Force to reach out to Leia. Vader and Luke have a moment in space. So now, in Luke's interaction with Leia and Luke's interaction with Vader, we see the Force being used to communicate, if not words, certainly thoughts, emotions, feelings.
Like you say, it's kind of a new Force power in the sense that we've had communication between two Force users in the previous film, but one was dead. We've also seen, with the Jedi mind trick and other things, that there is a psychological aspect or ways that you can manipulate psychology through the Force. But beyond that, it's like a feeling. You get a feeling. You're like, oh, hey, that's my son, my father. But again, it's another great moment where we get a little bit of an expansion of the Force powers, and we get some more subtle things. And I don't know, even with these hints, these things that have been put in the film about saying there's another, and then having her respond to Luke's Force request, is indicative of of Lucas knowing fully that he was going to take these characters in that direction in the next film.
Yeah. Lando and Chewie will head off at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. The plan to rescue Han has already been set in motion. There's really nothing positive to take from the ending other than Luke, Leia, Chewie, and Lando survive.
Luke gets a new hand.
No, I don't think he would have wished for it. But gentlemen, that's our film.
Great movie, amazing movie. For me, second out of all of them to the original A New Hope. Back-to-back hits like Lucas did was unprecedented. It just goes to show you how forward-thinking Lucas was, and really enjoyed it. Loved how it ended, and was excited about the next one.
The end of the film, again, Luke getting his mechanical hand, the scene out the viewport, the rebel fleet. So we know that everybody got off Hoth. We know that they've rallied. We know that not all is lost, but it's also a cliffhanger, in a way. And we have a lot of unresolved things. What are we going to do with this knowledge about Luke and Vader being related? What are we going to do about Han Solo? How are we going to save him? And again, that's something else that wasn't really happening a lot in cinema, was not only sequels, but sequels that then leave you with a cliffhanger. It's a nice ending, but I'm still confused about Lando wearing Han's clothes.
Let's go through quickly. 1 to 10. David?
9.
9. Okay. Sean?
Oh, yeah, solid 9 for sure. Maybe even a 9.5.
I'm talking about the original, not the special edition.
Yeah, no, I understand. Perfect. Nothing you change.
No.
Okay. Wow.
I don't know about that. But David and I have been battling over his Star Wars film ranking for a long time, because it's
true. It's true. It's objectively wrong, is what you want to say, Sean.
Yes, pretty much. It hurts my heart.
There's no subjectivity. It's objectively wrong.
True facts. I mean, there's a sequel in the top 10. There's been 9 movies, so that's just terrible.
I'll actually go a bit higher than you both. I'll go over 9.5. I wrestle with ranking Empire ahead of A New Hope, or A New Hope ahead of Empire. So I guess I'll just have to settle for both of them. Somewhere in the range between 9.5 and 9.9. They're just they're excellent films. I love them. I rewatch them every year multiple times and enjoy them. Pick out new things. I mean, it's really I don't want to pit the two films against each other, honestly, right? I don't want to argue one is better than the other, but
well, I would argue that Empire is better, but the problem with that is you're kind of arguing again. You can't have Empire without New Hope, obviously, right? You can't have number 2 without number 1. or 5 with number 4 as the case may be. But everything that was great about Star Wars was taken, applied, and enhanced in Empire. And if you are really talking about great storytelling, being the second installment, it had to do the things that it did. It had to be a darker movie and all that stuff. But I feel like so much of the stuff in that film that builds on the first film, that makes it better. I think that, again, you can't. It's 1 and 1A, and it goes back and forth. I understand, Jeff, but I do. If I'm going to sit down, if I'm only going to have time to watch one Star Wars movie, I'll always put in Empire.
Part 3 of The Empire Strikes Back has come to an end. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please spread the word and subscribe to the channel Galactic Initiative. Thank you again, David and Sean, for many, many hours on this project. Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, all rights reserved. Galactic Initiative is a registered trademark, and other product and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Before you go about your business, remember,
these aren't the droids we're looking for.